On the 30th of June 1971, the Soyuz 11 spacecraft re-entered Earth's atmosphere after almost a month in space. On board were 3 men who had been seen on television screens across the Soviet Union and around the world almost constantly for the last few weeks. They were already considered heroes, brave cosmonauts who had taken on a risky and difficult mission and spent longer in space than any human had before. The people of the Soviet Union were keen to welcome them back to Earth, but when their capsule touched down and the recovery team knocked on the door, they received no response. Something had gone very, very wrong. The space race is the name given to the fierce competition between the United States and the Soviet Union in the mid-20th century to see which nation would be the first to conquer space. This intense technological rivalry is sometimes thought to have been a substitute for armed combat between the two powers. From the moment the Soviet Union launched its first satellite, Sputnik, into space in 1957, the battle for technological superiority between them and the USA would take place on a new frontier, high above the Earth. Continual one-upmanship would drive scientific discoveries and make heroes out of astronauts in the US and their counterpart cosmonauts in the Soviet Union. But being either an astronaut or a cosmonaut during this time of rapid, urgent progress was, at times, immensely risky. The Soviets took an early lead in the race, following up the successful launch of Sputnik by being the first to send a human into space, Yuri Gagarin, on the Vostok 1 space mission in 1961. As the two sides raced to get the upper hand in the ensuing decade, both suffered fatal tragedies. In 1967, the 3-strong crew of American Apollo 1 were killed in a fire. In the same year, cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov died when the Soviet Soyuz 1 crashed into the ground after re-entry due to a malfunctioning parachute. Despite these disasters, both countries continued to develop their space programs at a breakneck pace. The following year, 1968, saw American Apollo 7 carry out a flawless mission to test out the Apollo Command and Service module. This great success was followed by an even bigger one the next year, when, with the Apollo 11 mission, the United States became the first nation to put men on the moon. The Soviet response in 1971 was to launch the first ever space station, Salyut 1. The Salyut program went extremely well. Indeed, the final module launched as part of it remains in orbit to this day, as a crucial part of the International Space Station. However, like all spaceflight programs, this one was not without problems and setbacks. The first of these came immediately after the initial launch, while ground crews were still celebrating the success of Salyut 1. The cover on Salyut 1's telescope, it emerged, had not detached properly, dramatically decreasing the range of work that could be done on board the new space station. New, different objectives were hastily conceived instead. A few days after this, Soyuz 10 was launched with the intention that the 3-man crew would dock and board Salyut 1 and stay there for a month. However, the mission was aborted when Soyuz 10 failed to dock with the space station. The crew returned, unsuccessful in their mission, to Earth. Plans for the launch of Soyuz 11 were already in place. Originally, the backup crew for the Soyuz 10 mission were scheduled to fly, but 4 days before the launch, one of the crew, Valery Kubasov, felt unwell. An X-ray revealed some slight swelling on his right lung. Doctors feared that this was a sign of tuberculosis, and so, according to Ministry of Health rules, the entire crew was told to stand down. It turned out that the swelling was due only to an allergic reaction, rather than tuberculosis. This unfortunate misdiagnosis would inadvertently save the lives of 3 crewmen and consign their replacements to death. The replacement Soyuz 11 crew were to be Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev. They were launched on the 6th of June 1971 from a facility in Soviet Kazakhstan. Their spaceship was, by necessity, very small, and as such the crew didn't have the space to wear their pressure suits whilst in the capsule. The following day, the 7th of June, they successfully docked with Salyut 1. The crew stayed on board the space station for the next 22 days, the longest anyone had ever spent in space. They spent their time conducting experiments and using gamma-ray telescopes to collect data. Patsayev became the first person to operate such a telescope in space. They studied the weather on Earth, maintained plants, including Chinese cabbage and onions, experimented on tadpoles, algae, and flies, and conducted cardiovascular tests on themselves. Much of this work was groundbreaking, and it was done in a very public fashion too. For the first time, the general public were kept up to date with the progress of a space mission, with the crew even featuring in a television broadcast while orbiting Earth. Not everything went smoothly, of course. The grueling, monotonous shifts, which were designed to maximize their time on the ship, with one crew member awake at all times, caused tension. The three men had had only days to adjust to the fact that they would actually be going on the mission. Only one of them, Volkov, had experienced spaceflight before. Now they were spending more time in space than any person in history ever had. Mission doctors were, understandably, concerned about their mental health. These concerns deepened when, on the 16th of June, the crew smelled smoke. They traced the smell to a small electrical fire, which was extinguished with guidance from Alexei Yeliseyev, a veteran cosmonaut who had flown on previous Soyuz missions and who was acting as a crew communicator back on Earth. The three cosmonauts spent the night on board Soyuz 11 while the air in the station was cleaned. A potential crisis had been averted, but the close call left the crew nervous. They asked if they could return to Earth early, but ground control insisted they were safe. Almost daily television broadcasts of their activities continued throughout their stay on board Salyut 1. The men became household names. Naturally, news of tension or any setback was never included in any broadcast. Instead, coverage focused on the positive. For example, on the 19th of June, Patsayev celebrated his 38th birthday, the first person ever to celebrate a birthday in space. A few days later, the crew began to prepare for their return to Earth. By the 29th of June, the crew had packed up their payload of film and scientific samples and were ready to go home. The Soyuz successfully detached from Salyut 1 and flew in co-orbit around the Earth 3 times before making a re-entry attempt. The work compartment and the service module were both jettisoned as planned, leaving the crew in the descent module. At this point, all communication with the Soyuz was lost. This was worrying, but not catastrophic. The descent was mostly an automated process. Indeed, as the module approached the ground, the parachute automatically deployed, and it came in for what appeared to be a successful landing. The recovery team was at the scene within 10 minutes and noted that the capsule appeared completely undamaged. However, when they knocked on the capsule, there was no answer. When it was opened, they discovered the 3 lifeless bodies of the crew. Attempts were made to resuscitate them, but without success. They reported the situation back to Mission Control using a 1 to 5 numbering system. 5 would convey that a crew member was in excellent health, while 1 would convey the opposite. On that day, the report was 1, 1, 1. The cause of death of the cosmonauts wasn't officially announced for nearly 2 years. The mission had captured the imagination of the public, and the government was keen to emphasize its many successful research outcomes rather than the tragic loss of the crew. Over in the US, the disaster prompted fears that the human body simply couldn't cope with being in space for that length of time. Eventually, though, the cause of death became clear. The jettisoning of the modules during descent had caused a faulty valve to open. Air leaked rapidly out, and the crew, unable to wear their pressure suits due to the limited space in the capsule, died of asphyxiation. The body of Patsayev was found close to the valve, leading investigators to believe that he had survived long enough to identify the problem, but not long enough to rectify it. Alexei Leonov, who was the original commander of the Soyuz 11 mission before the late change in personnel, had recommended that these valves be manually closed, as he did not trust the automated system. Unfortunately, it seems the replacement crew had neglected to follow this advice. Leonov experimented with manually shutting the valves and found that it took him almost 1 minute, too long for the fateful crew, who would have had only seconds to respond to the emergency. There was an outpouring of grief over the deaths of the 3 cosmonauts. They were each posthumously awarded a Hero of the Soviet Union medal, and their bodies lay in state in Moscow before they were given full state funerals. Leonid Brezhnev was seen wiping away tears as he passed their coffins in a display considered unusual for Soviet leaders. A month after the disaster, Apollo 15 astronauts placed a memorial plaque near their landing site on the Moon. A Soviet monument was erected in 1973 at the place where the capsule had landed. This was replaced by a new memorial in 2016. Craters on the Moon have been named after each of the 3 men. In addition to this, many lessons were learned from the disaster. All future Soyuz were built with sturdier valves that had quick-action chokes for use in the event of an air leak. Now, crews routinely wear pressure suits during launches and landings. Every space launch since Soyuz 11 has been made safer thanks to the knowledge gained in the aftermath of this tragedy. In part thanks to these advances, the 3 cosmonauts lost during the return of Soyuz 11 remain the only 3 people to have ever died outside of the Earth's atmosphere.